After I buried my father, who spent years calling me his biggest mistake, I showed up at his factory and my supervisor laughed. "You think you're in charge now?" I handed him my badge. "No, I came to shut it down." He blinked. "You're joking, right?" I set the folder on his desk. "Read it." The room went quiet. Papers shuffled. His smirk faded. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of people like him. People like my father. This isn't just about a factory. It's about what happens when a child of neglect inherits the kingdom that once burned them alive, and what she chooses to do with it. I never really believed in closure. Not the way people talked about it, like a finish line, a box you check off before moving on. My experience with grief and betrayal was that they linger, they change shape, shrink and swell depending on the day, the light, or the smell of something familiar. My name's Maris Lockwood. I'm 41 years old. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, where the smoke from the mills clung to everything: your clothes, your lungs, your dreams. My father, Alden Lockwood, owned one of the smaller steel fabrication plants in the area. He was respected in that old school, patriarchal way where people confuse arrogance for leadership. He was big on discipline, silence, and appearances. He was also my tormentor. I don't use that word lightly. I don't mean he hit me or screamed every day. I mean he withered me, slowly and deliberately. He made me question my worth, my intelligence, my purpose. He called me soft, wasteful, distraction, and once, in front of 3 other supervisors, the biggest mistake I ever made. I was 29 at the time. I had an engineering degree. I was trying to help improve a failing process line. I thought I was doing something good. He didn't just dismiss me, he humiliated me. And yet, I stayed. That's the part one struggle with when I look back. I stayed on at that factory, worked under men who knew less than I did but earned more. I played the role of the dutiful daughter because I thought, maybe, someday, he'd acknowledge me. He never did. When he died, I was at home, baking sourdough bread. It was a hobby I picked up in my 30s, part coping mechanism, part rebellion. My father hated frivolous things, and he thought baking was a waste of time unless you're running a bakery. The call came from a lawyer in Scottsdale. My father had suffered a massive heart strike during a weekend golf tournament. Died before they could load him in the ambulance. I didn't cry. I just said thank you, and sat down with my hands still covered in flour. I didn't fly to Arizona. They shipped his body back. He hadn't remarried, hadn't even updated his emergency contacts. I was next of kin. So I arranged the funeral. I ordered the cheapest casket, wrote a short obituary, and buried him next to my mother, who'd passed when I was 22. They hadn't spoken in years, but I figured it was fitting. She'd never gotten away from him, not really. The turnout was small. Mostly old business contacts and a few factory lifers. Morris Tilley showed up too, the man who once told me I'd never be cut out for leadership because I asked too many damn questions. After the burial, I expected to return to work and quietly resume my role as floor supervisor. But then the lawyer called again. He wanted to schedule a reading of the will. My father never changed his estate documents. Not once. Despite all the contempt he had for me, all the verbal lashings, the passive-aggressive remarks, the public shaming, he never revoked my inheritance. No trust funds, no conditions. Just a will that said, all assets, business and personal, to my daughter, Maris Jane Lockwood. It felt like a joke at first. I thought maybe it was bait, some final test or trick. But the lawyer was serious. He showed me everything: the deed to the factory, the accounts, the patents, even a small vacation home in Door County, Wisconsin. All of it, mine. I spent 2 nights just walking around my apartment, trying to make sense of it. I barely slept. I dug through old emails and folders. I reviewed the factory's finances. What I found made my blood run cold. My father had kept the place running through smoke and mirrors. He'd taken out high-interest loans against the equipment. Deferred equipment maintenance for years. There were missing safety reports, and the insurance was about a year away from cancellation. He was running it into the ground. And nobody knew, or maybe they didn't want to know. And that's when I realized, he left it to me not out of sentiment. He left it to me because it was a ticking explosive. He thought I'd get buried in it. And for a minute, I almost let that happen. I walked into the factory 4 days after the funeral. I wore my usual clothes, steel-toe boots, dark jeans, a fitted work shirt with rolled-up sleeves. My hair was in a bun. I looked like I always had. But everything felt different. I wasn't just an employee anymore. Morris saw me first. He raised his coffee cup like a joke. "Back to the grind, huh?" I nodded. "Got something to do today." I went to my old locker, grabbed my clipboard, and made my way upstairs to the office that used to belong to my father. It still had his cologne in the air, faint and sharp. The desk hadn't been touched. My mother's photo, a black and white from 1983, still sat in the corner. I sat in the leather chair. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. Then I paged the team leads and department supervisors. Told them to meet me in the conference room. They all came. Some are curious. Some are suspicious. Morris walked in last, arms crossed, smirking like always. He looked at me and said, "You think you're in charge now?" I stood and pulled the folder from my bag. "No," I said. "I came to shut it down." He thought I was bluffing. But the folder had everything: the liquidation documents, the transfer of assets, the forensic audit, the safety violations. I had spent the last week consulting with legal and compliance experts. The factory was not just outdated, it was dangerous. And financially unsalvageable in its current form. Morris flipped through the papers. His fingers started to shake. "This is a mistake," he said. I leaned in. Yeah. So was leaving it to me, according to him. But here we are. No one spoke. I ended the meeting in 10 minutes. By the end of the week, we were fully closed for an audit. I didn't take a salary that month. I paid every single employee their owed wages and severance. I sold off old inventory. I scheduled inspections. And I started making calls, to unions, to community leaders, to the local trade school. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted rebirth. Word got out fast. At first, people were confused. Some are angry. Some were relieved. A few thought I was having a breakdown. But I made it clear, this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't revenge for years of being ignored, belittled, or shoved into the background. Well, not just revenge. The truth was, the factory was a rotting relic. Alden Lockwood had held on to it like it was sacred, but never invested in the people or the future. He didn't believe in growth unless it served him. Half the machines were from the 80s, the layout was wildly inefficient, and morale? Practically non-existent. People clocked in, did the bare minimum, and clocked out. Some of them had given 30 years of their lives to that place and still had no idea how it even worked beyond their station. And as for leadership? It was a parade of beer buddies, yes men, and guys who'd never opened a CAD file in their lives. So, yeah. I shut it down. But I didn't destroy it. I stripped it to its bones and decided to rebuild, properly. Not just a new name on the sign, but a new philosophy. A new blueprint. I spent nights in that empty office, drafting what I called the redemption plan. It wasn't a business plan. Not at first. It was a manifesto of everything I wished that place had been. Transparent. Fair. Skill-focused. Safe. Accountable. I called it Lockwood Engineering Cooperative, not a corporation, not an LLC. A cooperative. Employee-owned. Shared profits. Shared responsibilities. You show up, you train, you grow, you benefit. The old-timers scoffed. But I didn't need them. I found others. I started visiting nearby trade schools. Ivy Tech, South Suburban College, even local high schools. I asked questions. Listened. Offering paid internships with real training. I got in touch with a few women I'd worked with years back, welders, QA inspectors, engineers, the ones who left because they were tired of being the only one. One of them, Noriko, agreed to come back as head of quality. She was hesitant, but when she walked through the restructured floor plan and saw the new safety protocols I was drafting, she just said, "It feels like someone finally grew up." Her words stayed with me. There were hurdles, obviously. The first was financial. While I inherited the assets, the liquid cash wasn't enough to fund a full relaunch. So I sold off non-essential equipment. I let go of my apartment. I moved into the guest room of a woman I met through a startup grant program, Gloria, a retired civil engineer who took me under her wing after reading about my case in a local newsletter. She said I reminded her of herself in the 70s, before we knew how to ask for what we were worth. Together, we worked through the grant applications. I pitched my plan to 3 state development boards. One of them listened. Then another. Then I got accepted into a manufacturing revitalization program through Indiana's Department of Workforce Development. It wasn't a miracle. It was just, finally, some traction. And just like that, the momentum started. The building got a new roof. The machines got new belts, upgrades, recalibrations. I hired 3 part-time instructors from a local technical school to run on-site certification programs. People started showing up again, but different ones this time. Veterans. Parents coming back into the workforce. Young women who didn't know the first thing about welding but had grit in their eyes. One woman, Alina, told me she dropped out of her last job because her manager told her women don't belong on the floor. She stayed late every day for 2 weeks until she could pass her basic welding test. Now she trains others. It felt strange. Good, but strange. For so long, that building was the site of so many personal losses. It had swallowed my confidence, my voice, my time. And now it was filling up with something else entirely. I still had moments of doubt. Days where I would walk into that office and smell the ghost of my father's cologne and feel like I was just pretending. That I didn't deserve to sit in his chair, even if it was now mine. But then someone would knock on the door and ask me to look over a revised CAD file, or someone would bring in homemade cookies, or someone would say, "Thanks for sticking around, boss." And I'd remember, this wasn't about him anymore. Morris tried to come back. About 6 months in, I got an email. Subject, meeting? Body, "Hey Maris, not sure if you're still around. Heard the plant's under new direction. Would be good to talk. I've got ideas." No apology. No acknowledgement of the years he dismissed me, spoke over me, mocked me. Just the assumption that the door might still be open for someone like him. I didn't respond. 3 days later, he showed up in person. Walked through the front entrance like he belonged. I was in the middle of walking a group of apprentices through their first process run. He waited by the side, arms crossed, like old times. When I finally turned to him, he opened with, "Looks like you've done a number on the place." I nodded. Better than letting it rot. He laughed. "So what's your long-term vision? Are you looking for seasoned folks again?" I said, "I'm looking for people who build up, not tear down." We both knew what that meant. He left without another word. And I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 15 years. I never told many people the full story of what it was like growing up with Alden Lockwood as a father. What it meant to be the mistake he never let go of. What it meant to chase approval you were never going to get. But maybe I don't need to anymore. The floor runs clean now. The air doesn't smell like fear. And when the machines hum and the sparks fly, it doesn't feel like a battleground. It feels like something being reborn. By the end of that first year, the factory no longer felt like my father's. The name was different. The purpose had shifted. But more than that, the spirit of the place had changed. Lockwood Engineering Cooperative wasn't big. We didn't churn out thousands of tons of product. We weren't competing with the giant outfits out in Chicago or Pittsburgh. But we had contracts, small fabrication jobs for agricultural equipment, custom parts for local construction firms, repair requests from rail yards and steel mills that still held on in the region. We focused on quality and quick turnaround. More importantly, we were becoming a training hub. One of the trade instructors, Carlita, had this phrase she used constantly with the new hires: we're not just building parts. We're building skill sets that can't be outsourced. That stuck with me. We had about 20 full-time staff, and another 12 in rotation through apprenticeship. It was chaotic, messy, and beautiful. The age range was wild. One guy was 62, starting over after a divorce. One woman was 19, working her first job out of high school. We had single moms, refugees, retirees looking for second careers. And then there was me. Somewhere in the middle. Owner, but not a ruler. Leader, but not untouchable. There was one day, in the fall, that I remember vividly. A new group had just started, and we were doing a tour. One of the younger girls, couldn't have been more than 20, asked, "So who's the actual boss?" I said, "Technically, I own it. But we all run it." She gave me a look like I was trying too hard to sound noble. I smiled. Because I'd had that same look on my face once, skeptical, cautious. Waiting for the catch. But there wasn't one. That winter, I started attending city development board meetings. I didn't go as some polished executive. I showed up with machine grease on my boots, a binder of schematics, and a clipboard full of printouts. A few of the old guards rolled their eyes. One guy even muttered, "Oh great, Lockwood 2.0. But I wasn't there for them. I was there for the woman who ran a welding supply store and said she hadn't seen a female-run shop order in years. I was there for the teacher at Roosevelt High who begged for summer internships for her students. I was there for the kid who rode his bike 5 miles in winter to make his shift on time. And slowly, the board started to notice. We weren't just holding steady, we were growing. I applied for a workforce development grant and got it. Then another, for sustainable energy upgrades. By early spring, we had installed 2 sets of solar panels, partially powering the facility. The woman I'd once stayed with, Gloria, introduced me to a contact at a foundation that supported women in manufacturing. They offered mentorship support, and suddenly, we had a pilot mentorship program going. Every apprentice got a mentor. Every mentor got training. I didn't plan all of this out in advance. I just kept asking, what would have helped me when I was starting out? And then I made it real for someone else. On a personal level, things started shifting too. I had spent years with my identity wrapped up in other people's opinions, mostly my father's. Even after his death, I found myself flinching when someone raised their voice or questioned me too harshly. But slowly, that changed. It wasn't that I grew a thick skin. It's that I realized I didn't need to explain myself to people who already decided I wasn't enough. One afternoon, I got a call from a regional trade magazine. They wanted to interview the woman who shut down her father's factory and turned it into a model for modern co-ops. I almost declined. It felt too self-congratulatory. But then I thought of my mom. Selena had played piano for community choirs. She taught kids for free when their parents couldn't afford lessons. She used to say, "No one knows what you carry unless you play the notes out loud." So I said yes. The article came out 2 months later. The headline was clunky, but the photo was strong. Me, in front of the new sign, arms crossed. Underneath it read, "A new kind of Lockwood, how one woman reshaped her father's legacy." I didn't cry when I saw it. But I did sit down, in the same chair I'd once watched him shout from, and I whispered, "You didn't win, Alden." Every now and then, people from the old days would try to get back in touch. Some were sincere, a few apologized, said they regretted how things had been handled. Others were opportunistic. I kept boundaries. I wasn't looking to rehash the past. But there was one person I couldn't avoid. My cousin Derek. He worked at the factory briefly in the early 2000s. Left after 2 years when my father refused to promote him. We hadn't talked in almost a decade. But he showed up one day, just outside the new break room. He said, "Didn't expect to see the name still on the door." I said, "Well, I thought about changing it. But then I figured. No. I'll make the name mean something else." He nodded. "You did. Place looks alive." We stood in silence for a moment. Then he asked, "Have you ever thought about selling?" I laughed. "Not a chance." He shrugged, like it had been worth a try. "Do you ever think your dad would have come around?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't care anymore. Something happens when you finally stop asking for approval. You start building without looking over your shoulder. That's what Lockwood Engineering Co-op became for me, not just a business, but a way to anchor myself to something good. Something forward-facing. And, slowly, I started having a life again. I adopted a dog. I joined a book club, full of women in their 50s and 60s who didn't care about credentials or job titles. I even reconnected with someone from college, a quiet graphic designer who sent me a message after reading the magazine article. We started talking. We're still talking. I don't know what it'll become. I'm not rushing. After all, I spent a long time waiting for a man to define me. I'm done with that part of the story. About a year and a half after I'd taken over the factory, a curious little article showed up in Midwest Manufacturing Monthly, a puff piece on declining legacy operations, featuring a case study on shuttered plants in Indiana. Right there, buried in the third paragraph, was a quote from Morris Tilley. "We were doing things the old school way. Then new blood came in, deciding the tradition wasn't worth saving. You lose your backbone when you cut out the people who built it." He didn't name me. He didn't have to. I didn't feel angry. I felt confirmed. He still thought of it as something he lost. I thought of it as something I'd reclaimed. That was the difference. Because Lockwood Engineering Co-op wasn't his anymore. And it was never his to begin with. That building had stood for decades off the labor and effort of people who were always pushed to the margins. I just pulled the spotlight to where it always should have been. And as for the legacy he mourned so loudly, I was busy rewriting it. The first time I saw our new apprentice class graduate, I cried. Not in a messy, dramatic way. Just quiet tears, the kind that come when you realize the hard part is finally paying off. We held the ceremony on-site, folding chairs, homemade cupcakes, second-hand string lights from a wedding rental place. Someone printed certificates. One of the welder's daughters played violin. Alina, the woman who once said she was told to get out of welding, gave a short speech. She said, "I didn't think I belonged here. But someone built a door where there used to be a wall. So I walked through it." And the whole room clapped. That was the first time I let myself believe, not hope, not wish, but believe that this thing might actually last. By year 3, we were profitable. Not wildly. Not by a yacht as profitable. But steady, ethical, and growing. We had our first internal promotion cycle. I watched 2 women, both under 30, take on leadership roles in departments that had never seen a woman in charge before. No one blinked. The community started leaning on us, in good ways. The high school sent students our way. Local businesses reached out for partnerships. Even Purdue's extension office asked us to host a workshop. It all kept moving. Quietly, steadily. Like gears that finally got oiled after years of grinding. And then came the letter. Handwritten. On thick cream stationery. From Verity Lockwood. My father's second wife. The one who replaced my mother. The woman I'd only met once, decades ago. She wrote, I heard what you've done with Alden's factory. I think he would have hated it. But I think that means you did the right thing. Just wanted to say. Good for you. That was it. No apology. No long story. But it was enough. I kept that letter in the drawer of my desk. Not because it gave me closure, but because it reminded me that even those who orbited his world could see what he'd become, and what I'd undone. The ultimate revenge isn't slamming doors. It's building your own and deciding who gets to walk through them. It's taking the name that was once spit at you like an insult and turning it into something people say with pride. It's going to sleep knowing you didn't just outlast the pain, you transformed it. Sometimes people ask me if I'm proud of what I built. I always pause. Because proud isn't the right word. What I feel is settled. Grounded. Free. Like the chain was broken, and I didn't just walk away from it, I melted it down, reshaped it, and built something new. That's what Lockwood Engineering Cooperative is. That's what I am now. Not a mistake. The masterpiece.